Welcome to the Million Vegan Grandmothers podcast. And today I have Nish Dubashia. And Nish and I had a conversation earlier, which started a whole trajectory of really interesting thoughts and writing. And so thank you, Nish, for being one of those great spirits in the world that holds space for possibilities.
Well, thank you very much, Tammy. Thank you. And yeah, it's great to be here, and it's great to be talking with you today.
So I invited Nish onto a podcast in the summer of this year where we were speaking on spiral dynamics predominantly. And then we went into his diamond model and his conversation with David Bohm and how we have this ability as beings, spiritual beings in this human experience, to live in a more holistic way, despite that a lot of the world lives in a very fragmented way. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. I really enjoyed our conversation.
So since our conversation, what sparked in me was a need to write, or a desire, a longing to write a book called The Essence of Sacred Relationship, because we're in relationship with everything. We're in relationship with ourselves. We're in relationship with the earth, animals, other beings, community, and our spirit. We're in a relationship with our spirit. And through that, through looking at the diamond model and spiral dynamics, we're able to basically, how I would word it in the book, have a sacred relationship also with the regression. Instead of seeing it as a spiritual backslide, we can see it as, oh, I'm spiraling back down to finish healing maybe a hole in my dynamic that needs to be healed so I can ascend into a greater level of being. Is that part of what you teach, Nish? I know that you're a spiritual teacher and you teach people to, what I sense from you is you teach people to accept what's happening as the teacher itself. Would you elaborate on that?
Yeah, certainly. So one of the things I try to teach people who come to my classes and courses, is that we're all involved consciously or unconsciously in a process of development in many different areas, including the spiritual development. And as we ascend this spiral, we can call it, in one of the models we use is Spiral Dynamics. As we ascend this spiral, we're constantly transcending, going beyond the limitations of the stage that we're currently at, limitations in our thinking and feeling and what we can see, what we can sense, who we care for, what we identify with. And what I've found is very important is as we transcend each stage, we also equally importantly have to go back and include the stages that have gone before. If we simply transcend and keep transcending, we're going to do what is commonly called spiritual bypassing. We're going to be just moving and ascending upwards to more and more rarefied states and structures, which is good. But if we bypass that equally important act of including, then we're going to leave what I call holes in our spiral. We're going to leave issues that are not dealt with properly. And this will eventually show up as shadow material, which will then be projected onto people, onto events. And we'll end up being these highly evolved people in one aspect, but in other aspects, we've still got a lot of wounding and other areas that we haven't dealt with properly. So I always say transcend and then go back and include, transcend and then go back and include. And it's this including mechanism that's so often overlooked in spiritual circles, but in some ways that's equally important, and in some people even more important than the transcend mechanism, because we have to evolve, but we also have to heal. We don't want to be highly evolved beings who haven't healed ourselves properly, because that will manifest in our actions in the world. And one of the ways we must do that, and I think this is relevant to the kind of work you're doing as well, is we must go back and include the natural world, because the natural world, what we call nature, is so easily forgotten and left behind by spiritual seekers as we seek to ascend to these higher stages that we imagine we have to get to. But the natural world and nature is the ground of our being. It's where we've come from. And we must go back and include that in our being and show deep respect by honoring where we've come from as well. Otherwise, that could be the biggest hole of all in our spiral if we don't include the natural world in our embrace.
Yeah, beautiful. That brings up so many thoughts for me that we bypass that. So that's kind of like a nature bypass as a spiritual bypass. It's like a nature bypass.
Yes.
You know, my first book, Earth Gut, was that what shows up in our gut, you know, when everyone started talking about the gut as maybe even more important than the brain to focus on, because it does inform the brain and how healthy our brain will be, that our gut is a direct reflection of the earth. And there's no way around that. The other thing it really makes me realize is that this spiritual bypass creates a lot of projection, predominantly in homes, and a lot of hidden addiction in all kinds of ways, which is what we're seeing. You know, I want to be the spiritual guru, so the world sees one part of me, but I go home and I'm addicted to porn, or I'm addicted to alcohol, or marijuana has become a really popular addiction, you know, because it's, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be really honest, we've seen this so much in spiritual teachers from every tradition going back as far as we have records. And I think spiritual doesn't mean spirit to the exclusion of the other aspects of our being. Spiritual has to include the body, the emotions, the mind, the soul, our relationships, our relationship with money, our relationship with food, our relationship with our partners. All of that has to be included in the spiritual life. Otherwise, we've created what I call in my diamond model of fragmentation. We're separating things that aren't really separate. And this, as you say, is going to lead to all these problems. What we fragment, whether it be money, food, sex, nature, anything, what we fragment will come back with a vengeance in some other unhealed, unseen, unacknowledged part of our lives. So we have to heal everything and include everything. Otherwise, we're really healing nothing. We're just finding another way to escape.
Yeah, powerful. And trying to ascend above instead of going to the messiness. Because the messiness is what is really the challenge, isn't it? To go deep into us, especially if we have ascended to a certain place where people see us as spiritual teachers, then it's really difficult to go back and accept that really gnarly part of ourselves that hasn't been touched yet.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we look at the evolution of spiritual teachings through history, this took a long while to get recognized. Some of the earlier traditions were literally about just getting out of here. This world is suffering. Let's just get the hell out of this horrible place. That was the orientation of many of the earlier spiritual traditions, like early Buddhism, for example, and there are the Gnostic traditions. But as these traditions themselves evolved, and it's still going on now, haven't reached the completion of that process yet. It became recognized that we need to take what I call a more non-dual position. So yes, we have to realize this wholeness, but we also have to go back and embrace and tidy up and heal the multiplicity, what I call the multiplicity. And we see that movement in different traditions as well, like in some of the tantric traditions of the East, for example. You have to go back and re-own your body. You have to go back and heal the body. You have to go back and heal your emotions. And I think that's where that's the most important focus now, I think, for where spiritual practitioners and teachers need to go. Yes, we're transcending. That's quite well established in our human process now. But are we really going back and including? And for me, that's really important personally, because I've seen so many car wrecks, train wrecks in people's lives because they ascend, but they don't go back and include. So for me, that's a very central part of what I'm trying to practice myself course, and also teach.
Well, that's the key to inclusion, is practicing with self, and not to stereotype at all. But my teacher, Gabriel Cousins, would say, women seem to be able to transcend ego in general a little bit easier than men. Like, I've had no problem, even when my kids were little, admitting, like, saying I'm sorry. I said to my and some of my children's friends would say our parents yelled way more and never said they're sorry, but it was very easy for me to say to my children, I'm sorry, I'm so tired and I shouldn't have talked so sharp to you, and it's not okay. And so that amount of humbleness that's necessary. The other part of that inclusion is, though, that you need to be received. And there needs to be a certain level of healing that happens, not with a child. A child is all about moving on to the next thing and accepting everyone for who they are. At least my grandchildren are like that. But as adults, we get so sticky and wounded that we have a hard time with people coming in front of us vulnerable. It's like, it's really hard to sacredly listen and to be there for each other, it appears, to allow all those parts without the other person having a certain level of, see, I knew it was you that was wounded, instead of like, hey, we found each other because we're teachers for each other. And I know this is really absolutely true in my yogic tradition. I mean, my friend studied in the Kundalini yogic tradition, and she was very sexually like mistreated. And then the same happened in a sattva yoga teacher that I had for a while. And the same, with so many yogic traditions that I studied under, the teacher fell from grace and hard. And it was very much revealed how long this went on for them, sometimes decades.
Yes, yes. Oh, absolutely. And I think this is why our practice has to be multifaceted. We have to, in our spiritual practice, include at least 3 elements. There's the element of waking up, which is what spiritual teachers are most familiar with. Waking up from the various illusions that we all have, moving into states of mystical experience. That's one part of it. The second part of it is what we could call growing up, which is different from waking up. So waking up means, you're seeing through the unnecessary illusions of life and seeing and moving into wholeness. But growing up is the ability to then take what you've seen and what you've perceived or had an insight into through that waking up and integrating it into where you are in your actual world of multiplicity. And there are better ways and worse ways of doing that. And the third aspect is the cleaning up, which means we also have to go back down to earlier stages of our growing up, where we still have material that needs to be healed and worked with. Now, it's very rare to find teachers and traditions that do all 3 of these. Typically, the Western psychological tradition, I could call it, has been very good with growing up and cleaning up, not so great on waking up. The Eastern spiritual traditions have been brilliant with waking up, not so great on growing up and cleaning up. So what we really need is an integration of the best that the West and the East has to offer in this regard. The West can help, the Western approaches can really help with the growing up and the cleaning up. The Eastern approaches can really help with the waking up. This is also to do with left brain and right brain in different ways as well. So what I try to emphasize is the time has come now where we need a global approach. Left and right brain in union, masculine and feminine in union, East and West in union. So we get the whole picture. We wake up, we grow up, we clean up. And once we've done all of that, we show up. We find ways of taking all of that and showing up in the world so that we can make a difference. And we really do need all of these. Otherwise, what we've not included will be a hole through which difficulties can arise.
As we're seeing now in a very fragmented world. So what you're saying and what I hear you teach, and thank you for being that teacher, that brings both the West and the East and saying, you know, we can't leave one out.
Mm.
I've watched this even in my vegan community where people
Mm.
come with you know, they're cleaning up the way that they ate, the way that they've lived their life. And then and then there can be a projection of the other. And then I see people that have integrated you know, what we say in our 12-step groups, by the grace of God go I, you know, that this was me once, and I can be in more complete wholeness to be a reflection of wholeness without judgment. That's more of a wholeness. So how do we, I guess the question is, how do we see wholeness in another being? One of my shamans said we can't actually help people heal unless we can see them in their healed state. How do we see the wholeness in the messiness of, you know, the way that we've gone through animal agriculture, the amount of death, disease, and destruction, how what my teacher, Dr. Gabriel Cousin, would say, the upside down and backwards, the abnormal has become so normalized that the normal, which is nonviolence, has become extreme and abnormal. So how do we see the wholeness of all of that, but still hold space for a holier way of being?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, and it's not easy to do that. So if I can refer to my diamond model, I talk in terms of three main levels, if you like: wholes, parts, and fragments. Wholeness, multiplicity, fragmentation. So in any situation, so if we're looking at the history of humanity, for example, or the messiness, the dire situation we see in the world today, we can see the easiest thing to see is the multiplicity and the fragmentation. So we can see that, you know, there are parts. We can see that the parts are in conflict with one another. We can see that there is a way that the parts could work together harmoniously. What is more difficult to see is, first of all, the potential for wholeness. So wholeness always exists as a potential in people and in situations. But there's also, at a deeper level, the wholeness that's always and already present, even in the midst of the fragmentation. And there's a little bit of a paradox here, because on the one hand, things are terrible. On the other hand, from a different perspective, things are exactly the way they're meant to be. And it's very difficult to hold both of these together. But that's what we need to do. There is a sense in which we're all unenlightened and we're all on a journey to enlightenment. There's also another sense in which we're all already in possession of the Buddha nature. We're all already Buddhas playing this game out. It's very important to hold both of those. If we veer too much in the direction of wholeness, we're not going to see the urgency of changing things, because we're just going to say, well, everything's just fine as it is. And there are spiritual groups that do that. They veer so much in that direction, they just kind of hang out in that wholeness space. They're just blissed out in that wholeness space. They don't become activists, which obviously is what the world needs. We need, you know, social activists and food activists and you know, the kind of work you're doing, for example. On the other hand, the other danger is we focus so much on the multiplicity and the fragmentation that we just get completely lost and overwhelmed by just how bad everything is. And we fail to see that there is actually divinity on the other side of this badness. And there is actually divinity working itself all the way through, even in the mess. So somehow we need to emphasize both of those: the wholeness, multiplicity, and fragmentation. And the way I try to do that in my teaching is we emphasize the waking up, the growing up equally. The waking up will enable us to see, yeah, everything's fine. Even when terrible things are happening, at some level, everything is fine. But the growing up and the cleaning up will also remind us everything's fine, but there's still a hell of a lot to do in order for that divinity that's already there to really be able to shine through. So the wholeness is already there, but we need to make space for that wholeness to shine through. And that's our work. We're not creating a wholeness, it's already there. But we've got to find ways to enable that already there wholeness to manifest. And that's what we need to do as teachers and activists.
Mm. And as one of my favorite sayings is, what is in the way is the way. So whatever shows up for our cleaning up is what we need to be looking at. We don't really have to search for it, but we need to just have rigorous honesty and humiliation, humble energy. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a kind of faith here that the wholeness will give you in each moment exactly what you need to be able to realize wholeness. And if we can keep that in mind, then everything that's arising individually and collectively is exactly what we need right now for wholeness to be able to shine through. And that's the kind of attitude of faith and trust that we need to work through our lives with, even when things seem at one level to be really terrible.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're very much looking forward to your talk on November 9th. You're going to be speaking on the diamond model and wholeness in a fragmented world on our convergence for VCOP 19. It's our VCOP 19. So if anyone's listening, please go to climatehealers.org. And at the top of the browser, you'll see a button for VCOP. It stands for Vegan Convergence of the People, because COP, each one of the COP gatherings, the convergence of the parties, have done nothing to create change for the good. We are just about to cross the 7th of 9 planetary boundaries. And if we crossed a few of them, there could potentially be the point of no return as far as whether or not we're able to save the planet. Or just leave her alone so she can save herself is more like it. There's also a prophecy that I have lived by since I had joined an Essene ministry 10 years ago with Rabbi Cousins and the modern day Essenes. And it was a prophecy that in 2025, we were going to begin the 75-year cleanup to a world of peace. So by 2100, we were going to live in a world of peace. I'm holding out for that, which means that I'm going to keep myself really healthy. I'd be 130 some, but at least my grandchildren will. I'm ready for that, but I'm also ready to be part of the cleanup crew. So thank you, Nish, for being here and being a teacher that brings both of these disciplines together, because this is what I felt has been missing in my life before I went to work with Gabriel Cousins, but I still found it a little bit too Eastern, where we would just go in and do a 0 point to zero out all of the stuff. I always knew that I had to go to the messiness, the raw, the emotion, and keep cleaning up. And it's not necessarily easy, but it sure is rewarding, because you know what it does? It opens up our heart. And when our hearts are open deeper and deeper, we're able to love in a way that actually heals and transcends the mess. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you for your presentation you're going to be doing within the next week and a bit.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Tammy. And and I'm looking forward very much to being a part of this this convergence.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nish Dubashia. I'm a writer and spiritual teacher from the UK. I'm going to be speaking and presenting at VCOP on the 9th of November. I'm going to be talking about a new approach to understanding reality called the diamond model, and ways of implementing that in our lives, so that we can become individually and collectively more whole and more integrated and healed in our experience, an approach I call the human diamond. So it's going to be interesting and exciting, I hope. So please do go and register on climatehealers.org. And I look forward very much to seeing you on the 9th of November.